She had nothing, no home, no hope, and no one left to believe in her. He had everything, except the one thing money couldn't buy, a mother's love for his little girl. When a broken-hearted CEO stops on a rainy night to offer a homeless nurse the most unexpected deal. You need a home, and I need a mom for my daughter. Neither of them imagines that a simple agreement will change everything. The skyline of the city shimmered under the fading dusk, a blend of golds and blues that painted a serene illusion over a world filled with chaos and loneliness. In a towering glass building that kissed the clouds, Elijah Williams stood alone in his penthouse office, one hand buried in his pocket, the other clutching a framed photo. It was old, taken nearly 4 years ago, back when life was simpler, before everything unraveled. In the photo, his daughter, just a baby swaddled in soft pink, stared up with wide, innocent eyes. Beside her was her mother, Alicia. She had been beautiful, sophisticated, admired. But in the end, she had not been strong. Or maybe she had been selfish. Elijah still wasn't sure. All he knew was that when Nadia was only 3 months old, Alicia walked out of their lives without a warning, without a backward glance. "I can't do this," she had whispered, tossing her diamond ring onto the marble kitchen counter. "I never wanted to be a mother, Elijah. You knew that." He had chased after her, begged her to think of their daughter. But Alicia had chosen freedom over family, fame over affection. Her departure shattered Elijah. Not just emotionally, but in every way a man could break. He had never felt so helpless. The boardrooms and billion-dollar contracts suddenly meant nothing when faced with midnight feedings and diaper changes. He had never held a baby before Nadia. And yet, in the dark, quiet hours of the night, she had become his purpose. The phone on his desk buzzed, breaking the silence. His assistant's voice echoed through the speaker. "Sir, your car is waiting. It's time for Miss Nadia's birthday party." Elijah glanced at his watch. 5 o'clock. Nadia would be waiting. Her nanny had decorated the house, the caterers had delivered cupcakes, and a princess-themed bouncy castle was set up in the backyard. Everything was perfect, at least on the surface. With a sigh, Elijah slipped the photo into his jacket pocket, grabbed his coat, and walked out. The mansion he returned to was grand, almost intimidating in its silence. White marble floors, crystal chandeliers, vaulted ceilings. It had all the trappings of wealth, and none of the warmth. "Daddy!" Nadia's voice rang out the moment he stepped inside. She ran to him, her pink dress flaring, curls bouncing. He scooped her up and spun her around, trying to smile. "There's my birthday girl," he murmured, kissing her cheek. 4 years old today. Where did the time go? She giggled. "I'm a big girl now. Can I have 2 cupcakes instead of 1? Only if you promise to save me one," he said, tapping her nose. The party was beautiful, an event planner's masterpiece. There were presents, balloons, and even a magician who made doves appear from a silk hat. But Elijah noticed something that no one else did. Nadia kept glancing toward the doorway. She laughed with the nanny, played with a few neighborhood kids, but every few minutes her eyes darted to the entrance, waiting, hoping. Elijah knew exactly who she was looking for. A mother. She never asked about Alicia. Never cried for her. Maybe because she didn't remember her. But she watched other children being picked up, kissed, held. And Elijah saw the flicker of quiet longing she tried to hide. That night, after everyone had left and the house was once again quiet, Elijah tucked Nadia into bed. She snuggled against her stuffed bunny and looked up at him. "Daddy," she whispered. "Do other girls have mommies who tell them stories too?" Elijah's heart clenched. "Yes, sweetheart. Some do." "Do I have one?" He hesitated. "You had one when you were a baby. Where is she now?" Elijah gently brushed a curl from her forehead. "She's far away, sweetie. But Daddy's here, and I'll never leave you." She nodded, content enough for now. Within minutes, she was asleep. He watched her for a long moment, her tiny chest rising and falling, her fingers curled around her bunny. Then he walked out of the room and sat down heavily on the stairs. The silence of the house pressed down on him. He had built empires, but couldn't give his daughter the one thing she truly needed, a mother's love. Not a nanny, not a tutor. A real, warm presence, a woman who would hold her, nurture her, sing to her when the nightmares came. He had tried to date again once or twice. Women were eager, charmed by his wealth and status. But none could reach his heart. None felt right. He had buried his trust the day Alicia left. Still, Nadia was growing, and she deserved more than he alone could give. Elijah leaned back against the wall, eyes closed, and whispered to the empty house. Maybe she needs someone more than just me. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have imagined, was that the answer to his quiet prayer was out there that very night, sitting cold and broken on a city pavement, with nothing left but her heart and hope that something good might finally come her way. The cold crept in like a thief. Jasmine Matthews huddled tighter beneath her thin coat as the wind curled down the alleyway, tugging at the holes in her shoes and the frayed edges of her scarf. The sun had long since disappeared behind the skyline, leaving the city wrapped in a harsh blue chill, the kind that made bones ache and hope feel like a foolish luxury. She sat on the edge of the cracked pavement, her knees pulled to her chest, one hand clutching a crumpled photograph. Her fingers had gone numb, but she didn't let go. It was a picture of her and her mother, taken 3 years ago, back when things still made sense. Her mother's face glowed with health and laughter. Jasmine's smile had been bright, hopeful. A recent nursing graduate, full-time job offer, a small apartment, a future. Now it was all gone. She had worked triple shifts at the hospital, taking on every available overtime, saving every penny. But cancer was a cruel, bottomless pit. Treatments drained not just her mother's strength, but also Jasmine's savings, her rent money, her ability to eat. When the insurance lapsed and the bills piled up, eviction had come quickly, unapologetically. At first, she tried sleeping in her car. Then she sold the car to pay for another dose of chemo. Now she had nothing. Just that picture. And a duffel bag with 2 changes of clothes. The hunger clawed at her stomach like an angry animal. She had eaten half a stale muffin that morning, found in the trash behind a cafe, and drank water from a public restroom. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked, her head aching. But worse than the hunger was the exhaustion. A tiredness so deep it made her limbs feel like cement. A weariness that went beyond her body. She watched people pass. Couples holding hands. Well-dressed professionals stepping into sleek black cars. Even a group of teenagers laughing over bubble tea. Life was going on without her. They didn't see her. Or maybe they saw her and looked away. The invisible shame of society. A young woman slouched on the sidewalk, dirty, tired, defeated. Jasmine pressed the heel of her hand to her eyes. The tears came anyway. Silent, warm trails down frozen cheeks. "I'm so tired," she whispered into the night. "I tried. I really tried." Her voice cracked. The pain of watching her mother waste away, of feeling helpless as the machines beeped slower and slower. It had broken something inside her. And now, sitting in the dim yellow glow of a flickering street lamp, she no longer had the energy to hope. It was pointless, wasn't it? People like her, people who gave everything for others, ended up on the street while the world kept spinning. Jasmine lowered her head and hugged her knees. She didn't see the little girl approaching at first. Just heard the sound of shoes, 2 sets. One fast and playful, the other deliberate. "Daddy, I'm cold," said a small voice. "We'll be home soon, sweetheart," came the deep, soothing reply. Jasmine didn't look up. Another father and daughter, probably on their way to some warm home filled with light and food. But the footsteps stopped. She felt it first, a presence, a shadow standing just before her. Then a voice. Calm. Curious. Gentle. "Miss, are you all right?" Jasmine blinked. Slowly looked up. A man crouched before her, eyes level with hers. He was dressed in a tailored charcoal coat, the expensive kind that whispered wealth. His face was sharp, commanding. But it wasn't his appearance that struck her. It was his eyes. They weren't cold. They weren't judgmental. They were kind. "No," she said honestly, before she could stop herself. "I'm not all right." He waited, giving her space. Not filling the silence with pity or polite dismissal. Just waiting. "I'm hungry," she said quietly, her voice trembling. I'm broke. Homeless. Nothing feels right anymore. I don't even know what I'm doing here. She expected him to flinch, to recoil, to hand her a $5 bill and walk away quickly. Instead, he studied her, thoughtfully, like he was seeing something most people missed. You're a nurse? He asked, noticing the hospital badge still clipped to her bag and scrub she wore under the coat. Jasmine hesitated, then nodded. I was. You gave everything for someone you love, didn't you? She looked at him sharply. I've done the same, he said softly. Beside him, the little girl peered at Jasmine with wide, curious eyes. Daddy, is she okay? Jasmine gave her a shaky smile. Hi there. The girl stepped forward and whispered something to her father. He smiled faintly. Then he turned back to Jasmine, expression serious. You seem like a good person, he said. So, how about we make a deal? Jasmine furrowed her brows. A deal? He nodded once. You need a home. And I need a mom for my daughter. The words hung in the air like magic. Jasmine stared at him, sure she had misheard. Her throat dried up. Are you serious? He didn't smile. Didn't laugh. Completely. My daughter's mother left when she was a baby. She's 4 now. I've done my best, but she needs something I can't give. She needs a mother. I'm not asking for romance. Or anything complicated. Just treat her like your own. Give her the love only a woman can. Jasmine looked at the girl, soft curls, big eyes, a sweetness that pierced her heart. Then she looked at him. I don't know what to say. He stood, offered her his hand. Say yes, he said. And I'll take care of the rest. The wind howled softly between the buildings as Jasmine stared up at this stranger who, for reasons she couldn't understand, had just offered her a lifeline in the darkest moment of her life. And slowly, hesitantly, her hand reached up to meet his. The car was warm. Jasmine sat stiffly in the back seat of the sleek black SUV, her duffel bag tucked awkwardly at her feet. Her fingers trembled slightly in her lap, the whether from cold or nerves, she wasn't sure anymore. The plush leather, the quiet hum of the engine, and the faint scent of expensive cologne created a surreal contrast to the pavement she had been crying on just minutes earlier. She risked a glance toward the front seat. Elijah sat beside his daughter, calm, composed, one hand on the wheel, and the other occasionally reaching over to adjust the little girl's seatbelt or tuck a curl behind her ear. There was something efficient in the way he moved, but also gentle, deliberate. Every now and then, he glanced into the rearview mirror at Jasmine, as if checking to make sure she hadn't bolted. Jasmine wasn't sure why she hadn't. Who is this man? What kind of stranger offers a home to someone they find on the street? And yet, it wasn't fear she felt. It was a strange calm, like her body, which had been in fight or flight for weeks, was slowly unclenching. Your name is Jasmine, right? He asked suddenly, breaking the silence. She nodded. Jasmine Matthews. I'm Elijah. Elijah Williams. And this, he smiled down at the little girl in the front seat, is Nadia. Hi, Nadia chirped, twisting in her booster seat to smile at Jasmine. You look like Cinderella. Jasmine blinked. I what? Nadia giggled. Your hair is like hers. And your face is pretty. You just need a dress. Elijah chuckled softly, and for the first time, Jasmine saw him smile. She looked away, cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to compliments anymore. Not since her world had turned gray. Elijah cleared his throat. We'll be home in about 10 minutes. I'll show you to the guest room first. You can get cleaned up. Then we'll talk if you're up for it. Jasmine nodded slowly. Okay. Part of her still didn't believe this was happening. The Williams residence was not a house. It was a mansion. When the gates opened and the SUV rolled up the winding driveway, Jasmine's mouth went dry. The home stood like something from a lifestyle magazine. 3 stories of elegant glass and stone, trimmed hedges, warm lights glowing from every window. It looked alive. Wow, she breathed, unable to stop herself. Nadia beamed with pride. I have a big room. There's stars on the ceiling and a little reading tent. I'll show you. Jasmine followed them inside, feet almost stumbling from disbelief. The air inside was warm, rich with the scent of vanilla and something floral. A housekeeper appeared briefly to greet them, taking Elijah's coat and Nadia's bag, but retreated discreetly. Elijah led Jasmine down a hallway and opened the door to a guest suite. It was larger than any room she'd ever rented: soft gray walls, a four-poster bed, polished wood floors, and an ensuite bathroom that looked like something from a spa. "There's fresh towels, toiletries, everything you'll need," he said. "Take your time. When you're ready, I'll be in the library. End of the hall to the right." She nodded again, barely able to speak. When the door closed behind him, Jasmine just stood there. Her knees gave out after a moment, and she sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands gripping the comforter. Tears welled up in her eyes, but they were different this time. Disbelief, confusion, maybe even gratitude, but not despair. She took the longest shower she'd had in months. Later, dressed in a soft sweater and lounge pants that had been set aside for her on the bed, Jasmine found her way to the library. The room smelled of old books and fresh firewood. A fireplace crackled in one corner, casting golden light on the dark shelves that lined the walls. Elijah stood near the window, staring out into the night, one hand wrapped around a tumbler of something amber. He turned as she entered. "Feel better?" She nodded. "Thank you." He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit. Let's talk." She did. He watched her for a moment, as if measuring her carefully, then set down his glass. "I meant what I said, Jasmine. I wasn't trying to rescue you. I don't believe in white knight fantasies or impulse charity. But I saw something in you. Something familiar." Jasmine met his gaze. "What did you see?" "Someone who's been trying to survive. Someone who gave up everything for someone they loved." He paused. "Someone who didn't quit, even when the world did everything it could to crush them." She didn't answer. Her throat was too tight. "I'm offering you something unconventional," he continued. "Not romance. Not pity. A deal." Jasmine folded her hands. "What kind of deal?" "I need a mother for Nadia. Not a stepmother, not a temporary babysitter. She's 4. She's starting to ask questions. And I can't give her everything she needs on my own. I've tried." He hesitated, then said softly, "She needs a woman in her life. Someone patient, gentle, kind. Someone who will love her." Jasmine looked down at her hands. "You barely know me." "That's true," he said. "But I know enough. And I'm a good judge of character." She gave him a skeptical look. He smiled faintly. "I'm not asking you to be my wife, Jasmine. Just live here. Be there for Nadia. Help her grow. Love her if you can. In return, I'll support you. You'll have food, clothes, anything you need. You can go back to school, pick up nursing again, or just take time to rebuild. No strings. No pressure." Jasmine swallowed hard. Her voice came out small. "Why would you trust me with your daughter?" He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Because when she looked at you tonight, she smiled. A real smile. I haven't seen that in a long time." Jasmine blinked. Nadia's tiny voice echoed in her mind. "You look like Cinderella." Elijah stood. "I'm not rushing you. You can sleep on it. Or say no. But the offer stands." She stood too, her legs shaky. He opened the door for her and said quietly, "Good night, Jasmine." "Good night," she whispered. Back in the guest room, Jasmine stood by the window, watching the wind rustle the garden outside. A home. A child who looked at her like she was magic. And a man who, for some reason, had opened a door no one else even noticed she was standing behind. Was this a deal? Or fate? She didn't know yet. But she knew one thing for sure. It was the first night in a long, long time she wasn't cold. Morning arrived like a soft whisper, filtering through the sheer white curtains and warming the guest room with golden sunlight. Jasmine stirred slowly beneath the covers, momentarily unsure of where she was. The bed beneath her was impossibly soft, and the scent of fresh linen and lavender surrounded her. Then the memory returned in a rush. Last night, the streetlight, the man, the offer, and the little girl with the voice full of wonder. She sat up, pressing a hand to her forehead, blinking away the grogginess. She hadn't slept that deeply in months. No shelter noises, no cold floor beneath her, no fear of being asked to leave at dawn. Instead, there was stillness. Safety. Someone had even left a fresh set of clothes on the end of the bed. Simple but new, soft jeans, a pale blue blouse, and a cardigan that still smelled faintly of a store shelf. Her heart clenched at the thoughtfulness. Downstairs, the scent of coffee and something sweet baking lured her out of the room. The kitchen was warm and filled with life. Nadia sat at the island, legs swinging as she munched on a pancake shaped like a heart. Her face lit up when she saw Jasmine. "You woke up," she chirped. Jasmine smiled a little shyly. "I did." Nadia hopped off her stool and rushed over, hugging Jasmine's leg without hesitation. "Daddy made pancakes. And he said you might like some too." Jasmine laughed softly, touched by the gesture. She looked up to find Elijah standing near the stove, a spatula in one hand and a mug of coffee in the other. "You cook?" she asked, surprised. Elijah lifted a brow. "I'm a man of many talents." She stepped closer, unsure of what was expected of her this morning. "I can help if you want." He nodded toward a mug waiting on the counter. "Coffee's yours. Breakfast is handled." She accepted the coffee and sat beside Nadia, who was now telling her about her favorite cartoons and her stuffed animals. Jasmine listened, nodding, smiling, laughing gently when Nadia told a particularly animated story about a unicorn who wore boots. Elijah eventually joined them, setting a fresh plate of pancakes in front of Jasmine. "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," he said casually, as if offering a couch to an old friend. Jasmine paused, fork midair. "About the offer you made." Elijah leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I've thought about it," she said, meeting his eyes. "It doesn't feel real. I'm still not sure if I'm dreaming. But if you're serious, if you really think I can help Nadia, then yes. I'll do it." He studied her for a moment. "You understand what this means?" "I do," she said firmly. "I'm not agreeing just for a roof over my head. I know what a child needs. I've cared for children in pediatric wings. I've seen the difference a nurturing presence can make. And I won't pretend I'm perfect, but I'll give her everything I have." A pause. Then he nodded once, slow and resolute. "All right." He reached into a folder sitting on the counter and handed her a few pages. Jasmine's eyebrows furrowed. "What's this?" "A written agreement. It's not a legal contract, just something clear, so there are no misunderstandings. It outlines expectations, responsibilities, and terms." Jasmine scanned the first page. Her name was at the top. It detailed that she would be Nadia's live-in caregiver, with full access to the household and financial support for her personal needs. It also included clauses about boundaries, no obligation toward Elijah romantically or otherwise, and full freedom to leave if she ever felt uncomfortable. "I had my legal team draft it this morning," he added. "It's protective for both of us." Jasmine nodded slowly, appreciating the professionalism. But what struck her most wasn't the practicality. It was the line at the very bottom, handwritten. "Above all, love her like your own." Jasmine looked up, emotion catching in her throat. "You really thought this through." He gave a quiet smile. "I don't offer anything I'm not prepared to honor." She signed it. Later that afternoon, Jasmine began unpacking the few belongings she had. Nadia insisted on helping, proudly announcing that they were now roommates, and that Jasmine could borrow her fairy wings anytime she wanted. When Jasmine gently tried to explain they weren't in the same room, Nadia pouted. "But I like you," she said stubbornly. Jasmine knelt and tucked a strand of hair behind Nadia's ear. "I like you too, sweetheart. But I snore." Nadia giggled and ran off to find a stuffed bear to gift her. Jasmine watched her go, the smallest ache settling in her chest. It had been so long since she'd been part of anything, since someone had wanted her there, not out of duty, but out of joy. That evening, Elijah found her in the garden, sitting on a bench with a book in her lap. She stood as he approached, but he waved her down. "I just wanted to make sure you're comfortable," he said. "I am. More than I ever expected." He nodded, then hesitated. "I know this arrangement is unconventional." And I know it might draw assumptions. She tilted her head. From who? From everyone. My staff. The press. My board. They watch me closely. Jasmine smiled faintly. Let them assume what they want. I'm not here for them. He looked at her, something unreadable in his gaze. You're handling this better than most would. Jasmine shrugged. When you've lost everything, kindness feels like a miracle. I don't question miracles anymore. There was a long pause. Then he said, almost reluctantly, Thank you. For saying yes. She nodded. Thank you for asking me. For a moment, neither spoke. The sky above them deepened into twilight, stars beginning to prick through the fading blue. Inside, they could hear Nadia laughing with the housekeeper over some cartoon. Something delicate settled between them, an understanding not built on attraction or obligation, but something rarer, trust. That night, as Jasmine curled beneath the covers in the guest room, she felt the weight of the months behind her start to lift. She was not yet safe, not fully healed, but she was no longer alone. She didn't know where this deal would lead. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The days began to take on rhythm. Jasmine woke each morning to sunlight spilling through the windows, the smell of brewed coffee, and Nadia bouncing into her room with stories about dreams and questions like, Do unicorns have favorite colors? Or, why do clouds look like mashed potatoes? Jasmine would answer every question, help her get dressed, braid her hair just the way she liked it, and walk her down to breakfast, where Elijah was always waiting with his composed demeanor and coffee in hand. At first, it was awkward. The mansion, though beautiful, felt more like a museum than a home. Everything was silent, too pristine, too perfect. But Jasmine quickly realized it wasn't because the house lacked life. It was because the people inside it had learned how to live behind glass. Elijah's world was efficient, orderly, compartmentalized. Meals were timed. Meetings were scheduled down to the minute. Even Nadia's playtime was managed by carefully curated activities and educational toys from catalogs Jasmine had never seen in her old life. But Nadia was a child, and Jasmine, for all her worn-down edges, had not forgotten how to nurture joy. She began sneaking in little things, impromptu pillow forts in the living room, baking cookies from scratch. Even if she burnt the first batch, silly songs during bath time and bedtime stories told not from books, but from memory. Stories her own mother had once whispered to her. Nadia soaked up every second like a flower in sunlight. And slowly, Elijah began to notice. It started with the laughter. He was on a business call in his home office when he heard it echo down the hallway, Nadia's laugh, bright and real and full. Not the polite giggles she gave when prompted. This was different. He walked to the kitchen and found Jasmine on the floor, covered in flour, Nadia standing over her with a plastic measuring cup, looking guilty but delighted. We were baking, Jasmine said sheepishly. Elijah looked at the mess. At Nadia's smile. At Jasmine, hair falling in loose waves, cheeks flushed with life. And for the first time in a very long while, he didn't feel like correcting anyone. He just watched. Over the following weeks, the cracks in Elijah's walls began to show. It was subtle. A late-night chat over mugs of tea after Nadia had gone to bed. A shared joke when they both discovered the family dog was terrified of vacuum cleaners. Jasmine would catch him watching her sometimes, quietly, curiously, as though trying to solve a puzzle he hadn't known existed before. But then came the day that changed everything. It was a rainy Thursday. Jasmine had woken up with chills, her body aching, her head heavy. She had pushed through the morning, making Nadia breakfast, helping her with a school project. But by early afternoon, her body gave in. She was curled up on the couch, shivering under a blanket, her skin dull and damp with fever. Elijah found her there after returning from a lunch meeting. His eyes narrowed instantly. Jasmine, I'm fine, she whispered. Just a little fever. Probably nothing. You look like death, he said flatly, already kneeling beside her, one hand on her forehead. She flinched at the contact, then relaxed. His hand was warm. I'll call the doctor, he said. No, please, she murmured. I just need rest. I can't afford. Jasmine. His voice was firm. This is your home now. You don't pay for care here. I do. There was something final in his tone. Something protective. And she didn't fight it. The next 12 hours passed in a fog. Jasmine drifted in and out of sleep, vaguely aware of Elijah pressing cool cloths to her forehead, adjusting her blanket, making her drink warm broth. He barely left her side. Nadia came in at one point with a crayon drawing of a house with 3 people and a dog, labeled carefully. Me, Daddy, Jasmine, and Bubbles. Jasmine had smiled weakly, tears prickling behind her eyes. When she woke again near midnight, she found Elijah asleep in the chair beside her, his arms folded across his chest, head tilted back. She stared at him in the dim light. He looked human. Not the perfect CEO. Not the controlled guardian. Just a man. Tired, worried, and she realized with a sharp ache, so very alone. The following morning, she was feeling better. Still weak, but well enough to sit up and walk on her own. She found Elijah in the kitchen, cooking again, his sleeves rolled up. He looked up as she entered. You scared me, he said. She smiled faintly. Didn't mean to. He handed her tea, their fingers brushing briefly. I haven't seen you that still since you moved in, he said, studying her face. I thought maybe you were running yourself into the ground. Jasmine sipped the tea. Maybe I was. I've just spent so long trying to hold everything together. I forgot how to let go. His eyes darkened slightly. I know the feeling. A long silence followed. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was honest. Later that week, Elijah's company held its annual charity gala. A glittering event filled with socialites, politicians, celebrities, and reporters. It was the kind of event where appearances mattered more than truth, and reputations were currency. To Jasmine's surprise, Elijah asked her to attend with him. Not as a date, not even as his companion, but as Nadia's mother. You're part of her life now, he said. And people will ask. Jasmine hesitated. What if they look down on me? What if they find out I was homeless? Then they'll deal with it, Elijah replied, his voice steely. You've done more for Nadia in a month than some of these people have done for their own kids in years. And so she went, dressed in a soft, elegant burgundy gown chosen by the housekeeper, her hair swept up and makeup subtle. Jasmine felt transformed. But when she entered the ballroom on Elijah's arm, she also felt the weight of 1,000 eyes. Whispers. Stares. Forced smiles. Is that the nanny? Where did he find her? She's pretty, but she's not his type. Jasmine tried to tune them out, until one of Elijah's exes, a model with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, approached. Well, well, the woman said, eyes raking over Jasmine. Didn't know Elijah had developed a taste for charity. Jasmine opened her mouth, but Elijah cut in first, his voice low and dangerous. She's Nadia's mother. Speak again, and you won't be welcome at any event I host for the next decade. The woman blinked, mouth twitching. Of course. My mistake. She disappeared into the crowd. Jasmine turned to him. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, he said simply. That night, as the car pulled into the driveway, Elijah walked Jasmine to the door. She looked up at him, the porch light catching the gold in his eyes. I know this started as a deal, she said quietly. But something's changing, isn't it? Elijah looked at her for a long time. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. And Jasmine, heart trembling, walked inside, knowing that whatever this was, whatever it was becoming, it was real. And it was only just beginning. Jasmine had always believed that emotional lines, once drawn, were easy to keep. But living in Elijah Williams' home, his world, was like being asked to trace chalk lines during a storm. Every day she told herself this was still just a deal. A practical arrangement. A roof over her head, warmth for Nadia, stability for herself. But each time Elijah smiled at her across the breakfast table, each time she found his jacket hung carefully next to hers in the foyer, each time Nadia slipped her hand into hers like it was the most natural thing in the world, Jasmine felt herself blurring. She told herself it was gratitude. She told herself it was nothing more. But the heart rarely obeys the mind. She visits her mother from time to time, All her medical expenses have been handled by Elijah. Although her mother's health was still the same. She cried sometimes, but sometimes she tells her unconscious mother about the new family she got and how they have been treating her well. One night, after Nadia had fallen asleep clutching a new bedtime storybook, Jasmine lingered at the doorway longer than usual, watching the little girl breathe in and out, her features so soft and peaceful. She loved that child. Fiercely. Deeply. Not because she was asked to, but because Nadia made it impossible not to. Jasmine slowly closed the door and turned to find Elijah standing at the end of the hallway, watching her. He didn't say a word, just nodded toward the stairs, and she followed him without question. In the sitting room, they settled into their usual routine. He poured a glass of wine, she curled up with tea. The fire cracked between them, painting gold across the walls and flickering warmth into the otherwise quiet evening. "You're good with her," he said finally. Jasmine looked over her mug, unsure how to respond. "She makes it easy." "No," he shook his head, eyes fixed on the fire. "Not everyone knows how to love a child that's not their own." "You do." Jasmine placed her cup down slowly, her throat suddenly tight. "She's never felt like someone else's." Elijah turned to her, his expression unreadable. "And me?" She froze. "What? Do I still feel like someone else's?" he asked quietly, the space between them shrinking not in inches, but in honesty. Jasmine opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled. She had been so careful, so disciplined, but now her heart thudded in her chest like a warning drum. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said finally. "I came here to help a little girl, to find a place to survive. And now," Jasmine looked down at her hands. "Now I don't know what I'm doing anymore." Elijah rose from the armchair and crossed the room. He didn't touch her, just stood a few feet away, like he didn't want to pressure her, but couldn't stay distant either. "I never meant for this to happen," he said. "This wasn't part of my plan." Jasmine looked up at him. "Then why did you ask me to stay?" "Because I saw someone kind. Someone good. Someone Nadia needed." His jaw tightened. "And maybe someone I needed, too." Silence fell like snow between them. Then Elijah stepped closer, lowering his voice. "But I've been afraid, Jasmine. Afraid that if I let this, whatever this is, become something more, I'd be asking you to carry too much." Again, tears pricked at her eyes. "You're not. But I'm afraid, too." "Of what?" "That it's not real. That I'm just filling a role until you realize it." He took one more step, closing the final distance. "Jasmine, look at me." She did. "I made a deal with you to give my daughter a mother," he said slowly. "But I didn't expect to find a woman who would make this house feel like a home again. Who would make me laugh at the end of the day. Who would make the silence bearable." His voice lowered. "I didn't expect to fall for you." Jasmine's breath hitched. Her heart was pounding so hard she felt dizzy. "You don't have to say anything," he added quickly. "I just needed you to know. I couldn't keep pretending this was still just a deal." But Jasmine didn't move away. She reached for his hand, tentative, soft, and laced her fingers through his. "I stopped pretending a long time ago," she whispered. Then, without thinking, without planning, she rose to her toes and kissed him. It was gentle at first, barely more than a touch. But it was everything. It was months of unspoken feelings, of quiet gestures, of stolen glances finally given voice. When they pulled apart, Elijah pressed his forehead against hers. "I don't want to rush you," he said softly. "We don't need to name this." "Not yet." "I don't want to leave," she replied. "That's all I know." He wrapped his arms around her and held her there, in the firelit room, in the center of everything neither of them ever expected. Later that night, Jasmine stood by the window in her room, staring up at the stars. She was no longer the woman who cried on the sidewalk with nothing but a bag and a broken spirit. She had found something, someone unexpected. Love didn't come in grand declarations or sweeping gestures. Sometimes it came in the form of pancakes, bedtime stories, and a man quietly standing by your side when you were too sick to stand alone. This wasn't part of the plan, but maybe that was the point. It was the same sidewalk, The same stretch of cracked pavement beneath streetlights that flickered like tired eyes. The same city, humming in the background with indifference. The same bench, still old and rusted, where a woman once sat in despair, clutching a duffel bag and trying to disappear. Jasmine stood there now, dressed in white. Not a grand, glittering white, but something soft, simple. Elegant. A flowing gown that whispered of beginnings rather than performances. Her hair was swept back with delicate pins, tendrils curled against her neck. She didn't wear a veil. She didn't need to hide. Elijah stood a few feet away, dressed in a navy suit that somehow looked better on him than any of the tailored tuxedos he had worn to galas. His tie was slightly crooked, thanks to Nadia's final helpful tug before she'd run ahead toward the garden where guests were gathering. He looked at Jasmine like he was seeing her for the first time. "You brought me back here," she said softly. "I thought it was the right place to start the rest of our story." Jasmine's throat tightened. She looked down at the ground, at the very spot where she'd once whispered, "I'm hungry, broke, and homeless," and where Elijah had answered with, "You need a home, and I need a mom for my daughter." And now, she had both, and something even more. Jasmine stepped forward and slipped her hand into his. "We didn't meet by accident," she said, voice catching. "We met because we both needed saving." He nodded, brushing his thumb across her knuckles. "And we did it together." The wedding was held in the backyard of the mansion, not because of money, but because of meaning. It had been the place where Nadia first called Jasmine Mommy, where cookies were burned and pillow forts were built, where laughter replaced silence. The guests were few, friends, staff who had become family, and a few of Jasmine's former colleagues from the hospital, who'd come with tearful hugs and stories of how she'd once lit up entire wings with her compassion. And Jasmine's mother, now better, smiling and radiant, sat at the front row in a lilac dress, her eyes brimming with emotion. She had tears in them from the moment Jasmine walked down the garden aisle. Nadia was the flower girl, of course, but she refused to walk alone. Instead, she grabbed both Elijah's and Jasmine's hands and marched between them with her head held high, proudly tossing petals in a way that felt more like a declaration than a performance. When they reached the small altar, Elijah lifted Nadia, kissed her cheek, and whispered something only she could hear. She nodded solemnly, then skipped back to her seat, giving Jasmine a little thumbs up. The officiant began, but the world faded into quiet focus. Jasmine wasn't listening to the words anymore. She was watching Elijah. There was no trace of the distant, haunted CEO she had met all those months ago. He was grounded now, anchored. There was warmth behind his eyes and peace in his smile. And for once, she saw herself through his gaze, not as someone broken or burdened, but someone cherished. When it was time for vows, Elijah held her hands and said, "I thought I was saving my daughter when I made you an offer. But I realize now, I was saving myself. You taught me how to live again. You taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or perfection. It's about showing up. And I promise, for as long as you'll have me, I'll keep showing up. For you. For Nadia. For our family." Jasmine's voice trembled, but her heart did not. "You found me at my lowest," she whispered, "when I had nothing to give. And instead of turning away, you gave me a home. But you didn't stop there. You gave me your trust, your daughter, your heart. I promise I'll never take any of it for granted. I'll love you both, not because I'm expected to, but because I want to. Every day, for the rest of my life." When they kissed, it was not dramatic. It was soft, steady, like everything they'd built, brick by brick, tear by tear, moment by moment. That night, after the laughter and cake and dancing under fairy lights had faded, Elijah stood in the kitchen barefoot, rolling up his sleeves to wash dishes. Jasmine stood beside him in her wedding dress, now slightly grass-stained at the hem, laughing as Nadia sat on the counter licking the frosting bowl. No cameras, no speeches, just the hum of a dishwasher and the warmth of a home finally filled. Jasmine caught Elijah's eye as he passed her a plate, and he said quietly, "So, still feel like this was a deal?" Jasmine leaned over, kissed his cheek, and whispered, "No, Mr. CEO. This was a miracle." He smiled. A messy, wonderful, unplanned miracle. And in a house that was once cold and quiet, love now lived loudly. In the form of bedtime stories, little feet running through hallways, laughter echoing down staircases, and two people who found everything they needed when they had the least to give. A man, a nurse, a child, and the kind of family not born from blood, but from choice, healing, and love that chose to stay. Forever. 3 years later, the garden was alive with color. Sunlight poured through the tall oaks surrounding the property, scattering golden flecks across the white picket fence. Lavender lined the edges of the path, swaying gently in the breeze. The house that once stood in cold silence now rang with the kind of music only love could make. Laughter, footsteps, the occasional squeal of joy, and the soft murmur of everyday life. Jasmine stood barefoot on the back patio, her white sundress brushing her ankles, one hand resting gently on the curve of her stomach. Her baby bump had started to show more in the last week. She was glowing, but not in the distant, unreachable way magazines promised. She was glowing with purpose, with peace. Inside, she heard the shuffle of tiny feet. A moment later, the screen door swung open and Nadia burst through, now 7 taller, her curls still wild and full of mischief. "Mommy, I found the blue paint. Can we finish my rocket today?" Jasmine smiled. "Of course we can. Just give me a second to." She was cut off by the thud of a tennis ball rolling across the deck, followed closely by a barking fur ball. Bubbles, now larger, fluffier, and still afraid of vacuum cleaners. Nadia chased after the dog, giggling, and Jasmine turned just in time to see Elijah walk out with 2 glasses of iced lemonade, a towel slung over his shoulder. "Caught you barefoot again," he teased, placing the glasses on the patio table. Jasmine raised an eyebrow. Says the man who wore mismatched socks to a board meeting. "I was making a statement. You were half asleep." He leaned in, kissed her forehead, then her lips. Soft, familiar, anchoring. "I love you," he murmured. She leaned into his chest. "I love you more." "Nope," he said. "I started this whole love thing. I get credit." Jasmine chuckled, resting her cheek against him. "You started it with a deal, remember?" Elijah laughed. "I married a woman who will never let me live that down. I married a man who turned a broken night into a beautiful life." They both fell quiet for a moment, just listening to Nadia's laughter echo across the lawn, the dog barking happily in the background, the wind brushing gently through the trees. "This is home," Jasmine whispered. "Yeah," Elijah said. "It is." That evening, the 3 of them sat together on the back porch. Nadia between them, paint on her cheeks, holding a hand-painted rocket ship. Bubbles curled at their feet, snoring. Jasmine looked at her family. A family built not from perfect plans, but from imperfection embraced. A man once too heartbroken to love again. A nurse who had lost everything but never gave up. And a little girl who brought them both back to life. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, Nadia leaned against Jasmine's arm. "Mommy." "Yes, love? Did you ever think you'd be my mommy when you were sitting on the sidewalk that night?" Jasmine smiled, eyes misting. "No," she said. "But I'm so glad I am." Elijah took her hand in the dark, their fingers entwined. And just like that, beneath a sky full of stars, their story kept unfolding. Not as a fairy tale, but as something far better. Real. Earned. And forever. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.